Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Really good to be with you here today, and fantastic to see this new facility for Pivotal. So as Robbie says, I'd like to really set the scene for today and talk to you about what we're seeing, how digital disruption is impacting organisations, I think across all sectors, and really talk about where we think that you need to go from here. So I'll give you a few examples. We'll talk about the reality of what's happening today. We'll talk about what we think you need to do strategically to compete in a digital world. And then we'll drill down a little bit more into the starting point of building your digital capabilities. But I want to start with an example of industry transformation. So Henry Milward and Sons is, or was, one of the leading manufacturers of needles and fish hooks near to my hometown, Redditch in Worcestershire. Of course, this was 200 years ago, in the days of the Industrial Revolution. Needle making was very much a cottage industry. And then Henry Milward built one of the early factories. Needles are sharpened by scouring them in a mill. So he first used a water-driven mill and then later steam power. And it really exploded, as happened with many other businesses in the Industrial Revolution. It exploded his business. So from a local company, Redditch became the global centre, would you believe, for needle making. And Milward was the leading producer. And of course there were some common factors in that Industrial Revolution that really led to that change. So things like new power sources, steam, new networks, canal and rail, new sources of knowledge, new sources of information, and particularly new processes and methods. And I think there's a very clear parallel with what's happening today. So all around us we see the digital revolution taking place. But because we're already in a global economy, it's happening at an even faster pace. And I generally think this is happening across all sectors. So whether you look at financial services, things like automated payments, IoT-driven insurance, the telecoms and media world, think about virtualized networks, over-the-top players, personalized healthcare, omni-channel retail, digital service in government. So every sector is impacted. And just like with the Industrial Revolution, there are some common factors. So we see things like analytics, like cloud, mobility, affecting this digital disruption. But I think there are two pieces here that actually are more important than all others. The first is data. So fundamentally, if you think about what does digital actually mean to us, it's about those electronic flows of data throughout our organisations. And the second is software. So again, if you strip it back, software is the organising business logic that channels and controls those data flows. So I think those two things, above all, are some of the factors driving this change. And of course we see it all around us today. So here's an example of my digital journey to work. And I've become a bit of a collector of digital processes and journeys. So I buy a ticket on my mobile. When I get to the station, I pay for my parking with a mobile app. I get to London, the QR code on my mobile ticket opens the barrier automatically for me, and then I've got an integration set up to channel the receipt from both the ticket and the parking into an expense management system. So we all see examples of this, but it's interesting to think back to those common factors and particularly to the role of data and software within that. So today I think there's a real imperative for us. That digital change is happening throughout our businesses, to us as individuals, as consumers, and to society as a whole. And in the past, whereas organisations may just have thought of technology as another tool, I think today it needs to become a fundamental capability, an integrated part of everything that we do. So it's not surprising to see technology, data and software becoming an integral part of many of the products and services that we use and work with. And I do genuinely believe that for your organisations, you need to respond. There's no option here. Companies that want to remain competitive, that want to remain in business, need to respond to this digital disruption. Otherwise, they are going to face a very uncertain future. And sadly, we do already see more examples of businesses becoming uncompetitive or spiralling down into obscurity. So it's no longer a question of if, but I think it's more how quickly you can start to develop those digital capabilities that you need to compete in this environment. So let's move on and think about what it means to compete in this digital world. I think for many organisations, it's become a very difficult problem. If you think about the role of technology and the IT organisation in business, have you got the right skills? Have you got the right people, the right structures in place within your organisations? We often talk about the IT posture of a company. So what's the positioning, the role and the perception of IT within your organisation? Has it got the mandate, a strong mandate, to be a driver of change and a strong collaborator across the business? And the reality is that for many organisations, that's not yet the case, or at least it's only started on that journey. So I would urge you to think not about making small change, but to really be bold here. So I think this really needs a rethink of technology and IT capability within your organisations. And I think this is why it's important to think about how you can accelerate your digital strategy. So not just to make sort of small steps, but really be bold, think how you can accelerate. And that's where finding the right strategic partners to help you, I think, is critical. And when I go around and talk to companies, I think there is a realisation that digital disruption is impacting and that change is needed. But there are also, I think, what I've termed some digital myths. And I think those are really holding us back. So I think it's worth trying to dispel some of those this morning. The first we've already talked about a bit. So, we can ignore it. Digital disruption is only impacting the minority. But whether your value proposition is based on customer centricity, on asset management, rapid product innovation, all business models, all value propositions are impacted by digital disruption. So I don't think anyone is going to escape this. A very interesting, but I think a dangerous one, is this thought that digital innovation is better suited to the born in the cloud companies. So it sort of goes something like, well, I'm a mature organisation, I've got all that legacy, we're well established, I can't possibly hope to compete with the Googles, the eBays, the Ubers and so on. But I don't think that's the case. If you think fundamentally about the capabilities that those organisations have developed, why can't you develop those same capabilities? That's not to belittle the job of modernising your legacy, But I think fundamentally to develop those capabilities is something that is possible. And Robbie mentioned the dinner that we had last night, which I know some of you were at. And I really posed that challenge to the folks at the dinner to debate whether their mature organisations could compete. And I think once we had a good talk around it, there was a consensus that it was possible. The next one is, okay, what about our approach to IT projects? Do I really need to make that significant change? Well, I think you do. The traditional approach isn't going to be work. It's tailored for a previous era. So you need to make sure that your processes fit in with the requirements of digital innovation. Another common one is customers say to me, oh yeah, we're doing digital. Yeah, I've appointed a chief digital officer, or the chief marketing officers all over it. We're well advanced. But when you drill down, whilst digital marketing, customer-facing initiatives might be a starting point, I think it's dangerous to think that that's all that's impacted. It's going to affect every single part of your organisation. So you need to think about all of your business processes. And then the final one is somehow that these digital technologies aren't, they're okay for small projects, but they're not enterprise grade yet. And I think in part that comes about because it looks different. So the process looks different. We want to innovate more rapidly. We favour delivery of functionality over completeness. But that doesn't mean to say that quality and testing takes a back seat. Far from it. We actually bring it forward. So I think it's important to realise that these technologies, these methodologies are ready for prime time. So what do you need in terms of the foundations for digital capability? What do you need to do in your organisation? So I think there are three key elements here. The first is the digital platform and infrastructure. So you need to make sure that you have a flexible, scalable platform that allows you to rapidly innovate and deploy new software and data-driven solutions and doesn't in any way act as a hindrance to deploying those solutions. You need to be able to automate the provisioning and deployment of those solutions in a way that software can drive that infrastructure. You need it to provide a rich set of platform services. So you want there the palette of technologies, if you like, that allows you to focus on the business value. And you need to make sure that you've got that architecture, and of course we're seeing now modern architecture using things like container technology, microservices, to some extent serverless event-driven computing, allowing you to abstract your business solutions to make them scalable, upgradable, deployable in a way that's abstracted from concerns about the underlying infrastructure. And I think an important point to make here is that, yes, you could go out and build that yourself, but why would you? We think it makes much more sense to take a rich commercial offering and implement that as your platform on which to build your digital solutions. And it was quite interesting talking to someone at dinner last night. They were telling me a story in their organisation about they had started off on that route of building their own. And it was at the point when they realised that they had 60 people just involved in maintaining the platform, which represented about 30% of their total development team. They realised that wasn't adding value to the business. So I'd urge you to remember that. The second part is to think about exploiting your data assets. So again, you need a standards-based data infrastructure. You need to be able to blend all sources of data, so both the transactional style of data that you're perhaps used to in your data warehouse, with unstructured data, with the high velocity streaming data that's increasingly coming from machine sources and the Internet of Things. But from a business and solution perspective, you don't really want to have to think about where that came from and what technique you need to interrogate and exploit it. So the journey that we see here is to move towards, again, an abstracted infrastructure, and we see people taking a data lake type of approach now, so that you can exploit that data from a business perspective without having to worry about the detail of what underlies it. And I think you need to think about the process for turning data into insight. So that needs to be sort of robust, scalable, and really repeatable, so that you can easily do that, and then expose those data insights within your digital solutions and make them actionable. And then the third piece is your innovation process and methodology. And this is, I think, the most important of the triumvirate, if you like, but also the most difficult to achieve. But it's the glue that holds everything else together. So you need to make sure that you're moving to an agile development approach, that you're using a DevOps style, so you're breaking down those barriers between development and operations teams, that you're enabling all of the stakeholders within your organisation to collaborate strongly together to bring that digital expertise together, and to continuously deliver new functionality, to rapidly innovate on top of that platform. And it needs, of course, to be a repeatable and scalable process. So how are organisations doing in this respect? So at Ovum, we've carried out over the last couple of months quite a large survey, global survey of around 1,200 respondents. And we asked them about a number of sort of aspects and measures of their digital transformation programme. So you'll see there's a range from methodology, platform, the way that they're transforming both customer-facing and back-office processes. But I think trying to summarise that, you'll see that roughly about 10%, 10 to 15% say that they've done nothing yet, so they really haven't got started. About 55% say they've done something, so they've started on the journey, and around 35% feel that they're sort of quite well down the road. But I really would urge you that if you've not started yet, or if you're taking those first tentative steps, don't hold back. I think now is the time to be bold. It's interesting also perhaps to drill down into a couple of those aspects, linking back to the foundation pieces. And I've broken them down here by industry sector. So first, the adoption of Agile and DevOps methodologies. And when we break down by industry sector, you'll see there's some quite noticeable differences. So most advanced financial services and telecoms, and particularly I think public sector perhaps lagging a little bit further behind. And then a very similar pattern if we look at platform adoption. So if we look at the same sort of graph for adoption of a platform strategy with open interfaces, again, financial services and telecoms at the top of the list. And it's interesting, I think, when you look at those industries, you can understand some of the common factors. So in financial services and telecoms, indeed, I think the threat of new entrants, so fintech firms, over-the-top players in telecoms and media, and I think a move towards open platforms and ecosystems. So things like the Payment Services Directive in retail banking, and the move to open virtualized networks and APIs in telecoms. I thought it would be perhaps useful just to think in business terms a little bit more about some of the common patterns that we see taking place in digital transformation. So we do see digitising the customer experience as often the starting point for organisations. So things like digital marketing, automating customer service and self-service, and I think now a move towards blending the online and in-store experience and creating an omni-channel approach. But it's not just restricted to that. So it's also spreading out quite quickly into the back office and business operations. So things like optimizing supply chains, rethinking things like finance and employee engagement, and thinking about back office automation. And then typically organisations move on to really thinking about their core service and business model. And for many, thinking about how they can move to a digital way of working, and it might involve things like new ecosystems, new partnerships, creating new technology-enabled products and services, exploiting data, using open APIs, or a whole range of industry-specific capabilities. And again, the journey will be unique for each one of you, but I would encourage you to think widely across the organisation. And a couple of examples of organisations that I think show some very interesting aspects here. So the first is Commonwealth Bank of Australia. And CBA, I think, were among the pioneers of understanding that the sort of customer data that they collected was a very powerful tool, particularly when blended with transactional data. So they undertook a program of using that customer data, doing things like monitoring social media for disaffected customers, creating new partnerships with other adjacent sectors like property portals, better fraud detection. And the two interesting things for me here, it really engendered at CBA a different way of measuring value. They understood the change that was required. And there was an interesting quote from Michael Hart, who subsequently moved to Barclays here in the UK, doing a similar job with Barclays, but saying that the information gleaned from those customer transactions had almost become more important than the transaction itself. And the second one is one we all know well, Tesco's. So, yeah, well known as an early pioneer of exploiting customer data and the loyalty scheme. But I think the point here is that once you develop these competencies and capabilities, it really enables you to diffuse it through your organisation, to apply that capability to many different areas of your business. So analytics and digital innovation has now become something that's spread out to a whole different range of use cases at Tesco's. So things like using weather data to optimise inventory and supply chain, looking to optimise store operations and things like their refrigeration costs, trying to avoid food waste. So it really becomes ingrained. And I think you see once you've made that effort, that it can ramp up quite quickly within your organisation. So to wrap up, I'd like to leave you just with a few thoughts on the steps that I think you should take next. And I'm going to look at each of those three foundation pieces. So in terms of platform and infrastructure, above all else, I'd really urge you to think about that platform approach to your business in two ways. One, making sure that you've got that flexible, scalable platform in place, but also think about it from a business perspective. So think about what does a platform approach, using open interfaces, using data, what does that mean to your organisation? Then on top of that comes adopting the application framework and the flexible technology architecture, and then make sure you've got the right tools in place to support that agile working. Don't get hung up on the technology and the platform. Put your effort into the digital value that you're going to add to your business. With your data platform, again, think about how you will evolve from the data warehouse of today to the data lake of tomorrow. Make sure that you're going to be capable not only of handling all of those different sources of data, but really to exploit them, to use them and make analytics a real competency for your organisation. And then finally, for the process and methodology, I think it's important to understand that the business value, particularly the customer, needs to lead your efforts here. So I think a good mantra is to put the customer at the forefront of everything you do. Think about the value chain, the process within your business. Make sure that you don't lose sight that this is creating end value for the customer. Work hard on developing that agile but scalable and particularly repeatable process so it becomes a competency, not just a one-off project for your organisation. And then I think using these tools, using these platforms, really look to accelerate your digital teams, make sure that you're bringing together all of the stakeholders across your business and empowering them to rapidly innovate and to build digital value for your business. So I hope that's been a useful start to the day, some useful pointers. I'm around for all of the day, very much looking forward to talking to many of you as we go through the day. I think we're having a panel towards the end of the morning as well, so happy to answer questions then. But for the moment, I'll hand back to Robbie, and thank you very much.